Welcome back to the Midnight Cases True Crime Podcast, where we follow the clues through locked rooms, forgotten streets, and the quiet mistakes that turn an impossible crime into a solvable one. Before we begin, take a moment to like the episode, subscribe to the podcast, and share Midnight Cases with someone who enjoys mysteries that refuse to reveal themselves too easily. Tonight, we travel to London, to a neighbourhood built on small objects worth enormous sums of money, to a basement vault beneath the jewellery district of Hatton Garden, and to a crime scene that left investigators staring at a wall, with a hole drilled straight through it. The hole was not large, it did not need to be. On the other side of that wall, rows of safe deposit boxes had been opened. Jewellery, diamonds, gold, cash, family heirlooms and private collections had disappeared. The thieves had entered during the Easter holiday weekend of 2015, while much of central London was unusually quiet. They had descended through a lift shaft. They had carried heavy tools underground. They had returned more than once. And somehow, during one of the most audacious burglaries in modern British history, the gang had managed to make almost every difficult decision correctly. Almost. Detective Inspector Clara Hayes reached Hatton Garden shortly after sunrise. The neighbourhood was already waking up. Metal shutters rattled upward. Delivery vans edged into narrow streets. Shop owners stood outside their doors, speaking in low voices. Some had heard rumours. A vault had been entered. Boxes had been emptied. The value of what was missing was impossible to calculate. Hayes had spent most of her career investigating organised burglary. She understood the difference between a break-in and a project. A break-in begins at the door. A project begins months earlier, in a rented room, in a parked car, in a conversation that sounds meaningless unless you already know what is being planned. She stepped into the basement and immediately understood that this had been a project. The floor was covered in dust and debris. Safe deposit boxes had been forced open in rows. Metal lids had been discarded. Documents, cases, and fragments of packaging were scattered beneath harsh fluorescent lights. But Hayes ignored the boxes at first. She walked to the rear wall. 3 circular holes had been drilled through reinforced concrete. The marks were clean enough to reveal patience. Whoever had operated the drill had not rushed. The wall was roughly half a metre thick. It had been treated as a technical problem, not a barrier. Beside the wall were tools, abandoned equipment, and signs of repeated effort. Something had slowed the burglars down, but it had not stopped them. Hayes stood there for several seconds, listening to the hum of the building above her. Then she said quietly, "They came back." The officer beside her turned. Hayes pointed toward the disturbed floor and the arrangement of the tools. "They did not finish the first night," she said. "Something went wrong. They left, thought about it, and returned." That changed the investigation. A gang that succeeds immediately can vanish into the dark. A gang forced to improvise creates a second chance to be seen. Hatton Garden is not a garden. It is a compact network of streets in central London known for jewellery, diamonds, workshops, traders, dealers, and businesses that survive on discretion. Behind modest storefronts, stones are examined under bright lamps. Gold changes hands, watches are valued. Private collections are stored away from family homes. The district has always attracted 2 kinds of people: those who understand value and those who understand opportunity. The vault beneath Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Limited held hundreds of boxes. Each box contained a private world. Some held investments, some held inventory. Some held objects that could never be replaced. A necklace passed from mother to daughter. A watch worn at a wedding. papers whose importance could not be measured in pounds. The public would soon become fascinated by the mechanics of the burglary. The lift shaft, the drill, the hole in the wall. But Hayes knew that every open box represented a separate victim, and every victim would have to reconstruct a loss that may never have been written down. Investigators began rebuilding the weekend minute by minute. The facility closed on Thursday evening before the Easter bank holiday. The timing was not accidental. The burglars wanted silence. They wanted offices empty, workshops closed, and the surrounding streets reduced to a background murmur. CCTV footage revealed men moving through the building dressed like workers. They carried bags, bins, and equipment. Not masks, not weapons, tools. The disguise was not designed to make them invisible. It was designed to make them uninteresting. The men descended through the lift shaft and reached the basement level. They attacked the wall beside the vault door rather than the door itself. The logic was simple. A secure door is built to resist attention. A wall is sometimes trusted to remain a wall. They used an industrial Hilti drill to cut through the concrete. But once they created an opening, they discovered a problem. A large metal cabinet stood inside the vault, blocking access. After all the planning, after the descent, after the noise and the dust and the physical effort, the gang faced an obstacle they could not easily solve. They withdrew. For most burglars, that would have been the end. Too much noise, too much exposure, too many ways for the police to notice. But the following night, the men returned. They brought additional equipment. They forced the cabinet aside. Then they climbed through the hole and entered the vault. Hayes studied the footage repeatedly. Enter, descend, leave, return. The second visit bothered her. It suggested confidence. Not the confidence of someone who believes he is lucky. The confidence of someone who believes he understands the weaknesses of the system better than the people responsible for protecting it. The investigation soon uncovered the detail that would anger victims and embarrass the authorities. During the first night, an alarm had been triggered. A call reached the police, but officers did not attend the scene. The alarm was classified in a way that did not produce an immediate response. The thieves were underground. The drill was in the building. The wall was being breached. And somewhere above them, London continued through the holiday weekend without realizing that the most important alarm in the city had already sounded. Hayes listened to the call log in silence. There was no dramatic failure, no single person announcing that the building was safe, no cinematic moment where someone made an obviously reckless choice. Just a chain of ordinary procedures, a signal, a classification, an assumption, a decision not to send a patrol. The burglars had drilled through reinforced concrete, but the alarm system had been defeated by paperwork. A second possibility briefly pulled the investigation in another direction. Around the same time, a serious underground electrical fire caused disruption in central London. Smoke rose from beneath the streets. Businesses were evacuated. Roads were closed. Communications and power systems were affected. The timing seemed suspicious. Had the fire been a diversion? Had the gang created chaos above ground to distract from the burglary below? It was the kind of theory that spread quickly because it made the crime feel larger, more sophisticated, almost mythic. Hayes asked for every available report, fire service records, engineering assessments, witness statements, access logs. But the evidence pointed away from conspiracy. The fire appeared to have been caused by an electrical fault. The timing was remarkable, but coincidence is not evidence. Hayes crossed the theory out of her notebook. Then she wrote one sentence underneath it. Do not make them cleverer than they are. When the first CCTV images reached the public, speculation accelerated. The thieves had entered a secure basement. They had transported industrial equipment. They had drilled through concrete and escaped with a fortune. People imagined a team of elite professionals, young, fit, technically trained, perhaps international, perhaps invisible. The reality was stranger. Investigators began identifying familiar faces from the British criminal world. Men with long histories. Men whose reputations had formed decades earlier. Brian Reeder, Terry Perkins, Daniel Jones, John Collins, Carl Wood, William Lincoln. Several were old enough to have left serious crime behind years earlier. Some had medical conditions. Some moved slowly. Some needed medication. The newspapers would eventually give them nicknames. The Diamond Wheezers, the Grandad's Gang, Dad's Army. Hayes disliked the jokes. Age did not make the crime harmless. Experience was the reason the crime had worked. These were not men attempting something reckless for the first time. They understood surveillance. They understood stolen goods. They understood the importance of patience. And they understood one another. At least, they thought they did. The investigation moved away from the basement and into the quieter world of observation. Cars parked at the ends of streets. Officers watching doorways through rain-streaked windows. Notes written at odd hours. Names connected to vehicles. Vehicles connected to addresses. Addresses connected to meetings that appeared casual. The suspected burglars behaved like men who had spent much of their lives thinking about police attention. They did not gather in a dark warehouse. They met in ordinary places, cafes, pubs, homes, streets where an elderly man carrying a shopping bag attracted no attention. But ordinary behavior becomes suspicious when it repeats. One man leaves his home, another arrives. A vehicle changes direction. A conversation ends abruptly. A bag appears in one location and disappears in another. Hayes pinned photographs and timelines to a board. She circled the same question every morning. Where was the property? Catching the burglars mattered. Recovering the stolen goods mattered more. Jewelry can be dismantled. Gold can be melted. Stones can be separated from settings and moved through private channels. A recognizable necklace can become loose components within hours. Once that process begins, the evidence starts to dissolve. The surveillance recordings revealed something unexpected. The gang was not celebrating. They were arguing. The burglary had succeeded, but success had made the group unstable. There were disagreements over shares, disagreements over trust, disagreements over whether the police were watching, and one recurring concern. A man known only by a nickname, Basil. Basil had been present during the burglary. Basil understood alarms. Basil moved differently from the others. Basil appeared in the CCTV footage carrying a bag over one shoulder, but Basil had not been identified. Hayes listened as the men spoke around the name rather than about the person. It was as if the gang shared an unspoken rule. Some people could be discussed. Basil could not. That made him more interesting. Daniel Jones worried the investigators. He was restless. He seemed convinced that the police were close. During surveillance, officers watched his movements carefully. Hayes believed that pressure would eventually force him into a mistake. People who hide valuables often become trapped by the hiding place. At first, the location feels secure. Then the imagination takes over. What if someone finds it? What if the ground shifts? What if another member of the crew arrives first? What if the police are already there? Hidden property creates its own gravity. The person who buried it is eventually drawn back. Jones led investigators toward a cemetery. The setting was almost too symbolic. Quiet paths, weathered stones, family plots. places where visitors were expected to arrive carrying flowers and leave without conversation. But beneath the ground, close to the resting places of relatives, part of the stolen property had been concealed. Hayes watched officers recover bags from the soil, gold, jewelry, objects that had been taken from the vault and divided among the gang. The dead had become unwilling custodians of stolen treasure. On the 19th of May 2015, the police moved. Raids were carried out at multiple addresses. Suspects were arrested. Bags of high-value property were recovered. The investigation that had begun with a hole in a concrete wall now expanded into homes, vehicles, storage spaces, and concealed stashes. The public reaction was immediate, not because arrests had been made, because of the men being arrested. The image of a gang of older career criminals carrying out an industrial-scale burglary seemed unbelievable. People wanted to turn them into characters: the mastermind, the heavy, the driver, the old professional returning for one final job. But Hayes looked at the recovered property and saw something less romantic. Victims who might receive only fragments of what they had lost. A burglary that had damaged trust across an entire district. And one important figure still outside the net: Basil. The others had faces, addresses, histories, and connections. Basil remained a shadow. Investigators reviewed the footage again. His posture, his pace, the angle of his shoulders, the way he carried weight, the slight irregularity in his walk. The black bag balanced over one shoulder. Hayes believed Basil was not simply another pair of hands. He was the technical mind, the person the gang needed near the alarm, the person who understood how to enter without creating a response. He may not have been the loudest voice in the room. He may not have demanded attention. But specialized knowledge creates a particular kind of power. The gang could argue about shares. They could replace a driver. They could recruit another person to carry tools. But they could not easily replace the man who understood the building. Months passed, then years. The main group had been caught, prosecuted, and sentenced. Basil remained unidentified. For the public, the mystery became part of the story. The unknown burglar, the final participant, the man who walked away. In March 2018, nearly 3 years after the burglary, the investigation tightened around a man living in Islington. His name was Michael Seed. He did not fit the public image of the Hatton Garden gang. He had a background in electronics. He lived quietly, frugally, almost invisibly. But invisibility has limits. Police searched his home. Inside, they found valuables linked to the wider criminal investigation: jewelry, gold, stones, objects that appeared to have been broken down, sorted, or prepared for movement. On a workbench, the private logic of the crime became visible. A finished object has a story. A ring can be remembered. A watch can be identified. A necklace can appear in a photograph taken years earlier. But dismantled objects become ingredients. Metal, stones, parts. Value separated from memory. Hayes examined a photograph from the search. Then she returned to the CCTV footage from the burglary. The man carrying the bag, the slight limp, the careful movement, the technical role. Basil had a name. Michael Seed denied involvement. The prosecution had to do more than show that stolen property had been found. They had to connect the quiet man in Islington to the figure recorded during the burglary. The footage was studied closely. His walk mattered. His build mattered. His movements mattered. The investigation relied on the small physical habits that people carry without thinking. A criminal can change clothes. He can wear a hat. He can cover his face. He can use a nickname. But the body remembers itself. In 2019, Seed was convicted and sentenced to prison. Basil, The final mystery figure from the basement footage had been identified. The crime had begun with concrete. It ended with a walk. The convictions did not solve everything. A substantial portion of the stolen property remained missing. Some valuables were recovered from addresses connected to the suspects. Some were found in bags. Some had been hidden underground. Some remained beyond reach. The exact value of the burglary was difficult to establish because safe deposit boxes are private by design. Some victims had records, some did not. Some property was insured, some was not. Some items were financially valuable, but emotionally irreplaceable. Hayes maintained a separate file for disputed losses. She noticed patterns. 3 box holders had submitted unusually vague inventories. A watch without a serial number. Loose stones without certificates. Gold described only by approximate weight. The claims might have been completely legitimate, but a crime of this scale creates shadows. It gives opportunists room to hide additional stories inside the main one. Hayes asked a junior investigator to compare the disputed claims against known dealers, repair shops, and auction records. Several weeks later, he returned with a photograph. It had been taken at a private jewelry exhibition 2 years before the burglary. In the corner of the frame, almost out of focus, was a distinctive watch. A rectangular gold face, a narrow black strap, a small scratch beneath the crown. The same watch appeared to have been listed among the stolen items from Hatton Garden. But the photograph had been taken 6 months after the burglary. Hayes stared at the image. The watch had not disappeared into the vault. It had never been inside the vault at all. Hayes reopened the disputed claims. Slowly, a second pattern emerged. A small number of losses had been inflated. Items were described vaguely enough to make verification difficult. Photographs were incomplete. Documents were missing. Claims were submitted through layers of companies and intermediaries. Most victims had suffered genuine losses, but a few individuals had recognized an opportunity. The burglary had created confusion. Confusion created uncertainty, and uncertainty could be converted into money. Hayes interviewed a dealer named Martin Vale. Vale arrived with a solicitor and the expression of a man who believed complexity would protect him. Hayes placed the exhibition photograph on the table, then the insurance claim, then a valuation document signed weeks after the burglary. Vale looked at the photograph for several seconds. "Watches look similar," he said. Hayes pointed to the scratch beneath the crown. Vale said nothing. The inquiry widened. 2 additional items were traced to private sales after they had supposedly been stolen. Another claim relied on a valuation document created after the vault had already been emptied. The sums were small compared with the headline value of the burglary. But the subplot mattered. It revealed something about the strange ecosystem created by a major crime. The burglars had stolen from the vault. A handful of claimants had tried to steal from the aftermath. One crime had invited another. It is tempting to believe that a spectacular burglary demands a spectacular solution. A hidden informant, a dramatic confession, a single forensic breakthrough. But the Hatton Garden investigation was solved through accumulation. CCTV footage, surveillance, repeated meetings, vehicles, conversations, hidden property, the nervous behavior of people who could not stop checking whether their treasure was still where they had left it. And finally, the physical habits of a man known only as Basil. The gang had understood walls, they had understood doors, they had understood drills, alarms, timing, and the silence of a holiday weekend. But they had misunderstood themselves. They believed experience would make them disciplined. Instead, experience made them confident. They believed the difficult part was entering the vault. It was not. The difficult part was living normally after the vault had been emptied. Meeting without appearing to meet, hiding property without returning to it, dividing money without arguing, trusting people who had spent their lives learning not to trust anyone. There is something unsettling about the basement beneath Hatton Garden. Not because the wall failed. Concrete fails when the right drill is applied for long enough. Not because the alarm failed. Systems fail when procedures replace judgment. The unsettling part is the patience. The thought of older men moving quietly through the city, planning one final job, studying a building, choosing a holiday weekend, carrying tools through a lift shaft, leaving when the first attempt failed, then returning. Returning is the detail that stays with you, because it reveals what the gang believed. They believed the building was still theirs. They believed the police would not come. They believed the vault would wait. For one weekend, they were right. But every crime continues after the escape. In parked cars, in whispered arguments, in bags buried beneath quiet ground, in the uneven walk of a man carrying stolen property over one shoulder. Thank you for listening to Midnight Cases. Until next time, remember that even the most carefully drilled hole can lead in both directions, into the vault and back to the people who opened it. Author's note: the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit burglary was a real crime. It took place over the Easter Bank holiday weekend in April 2015 in London's jewellery district. The burglars entered through a lift shaft and used an industrial Hilti drill to bore through a reinforced concrete wall roughly half a metre thick. The first attempt was obstructed by a cabinet inside the vault. Members of the gang returned and completed the burglary during a second visit. An alarm was triggered during the burglary, but the police did not attend the scene at the time. The underground electrical fire in central London was real. Early speculation suggested a possible connection to the burglary, but the fire was attributed to an electrical fault rather than deliberate arson. Brian Reeder, Terry Perkins, Daniel Jones, John Collins, Carl Wood, and William Lincoln were real people connected to the case. The police investigation, surveillance operation, arrests in May 2015, recovery of stolen property, and the concealment of property near cemetery plots are based on reported events. The unknown participant, referred to as Basil, was real. He was later identified as Michael Seed, who was arrested in 2018 and convicted in 2019. Michael Seed's background in electronics, the importance of CCTV footage, the evidence found during the search of his home, and the analysis of his walk are based on reported elements of the case. Detective Inspector Clara Hayes is fictional. She was created as a composite character to tell the story from the perspective of the investigation. The specific dialogue, notebook entries, surveillance room scenes, and conversations attributed to Hayes are fictionalized. The subplot involving Martin Vale, the disputed insurance claims, the exhibition photograph, the scratched watch, and the follow-up fraud inquiry is fictional. Those elements were added to explore a genuine complication in large-scale property crimes: uncertainty about the contents and value of private safe deposit boxes. Thank you for listening.